It's an Archaeodeath monthly review with Professor Howard Williams.
Hello, it's Professor Howard Williams again with a monthly roundup, giving you the latest in the world of Archaeodeath from my Archaeo Den. Basically, my philosophy is if you put Archaeo in front of anything and everything, it makes it sound cool. And I haven't been contradicted in that regard since, and I don't think I ever will be. So this is my Archaeo Den. This blog is called, YouTube video is Archaeodeath, and it comes from my blog and my TikTok channel also on Archaeodeath, and together they're about providing you with the latest reflections on my research in the fields of mortuary archaeology and archaeologies of remembrance. This links how we study mortality in the human past, but how we also debate those ideas, those ethical questions, those popular receptions in today's world. So it's about the past and it's about the present. So you'll see videos and reflections on sites I've been to, on issues related to the research I have into early medieval societies and other periods and places, but also reflections on our museums, our heritage sites, and our broader world of ancient death, which we've inherited and we stir into the pot of our modern culture. Now I'm going to kick off by looking through my blogs this month, then my videos this month, and finally I'll just get on to some random stuff I want to rant about this month. And hopefully that'll give you an insight into where to jump off from this video to look at other things. Now, a nice place to start is with a new publication. And so, as you know, from my previous videos, I'm the co-editor with my doctoral researcher Liam Delaney of the Offa's Dyke Journal, an academic open access journal that's intended to bring the latest research on borderlands and frontiers, past and present, to anyone who wants to read it. And we've got some classics revisited papers and some fresh research. Now, I started off the blog in August the 1st by announcing that, yes, we've got a brand new article out that's going to be part of volume 2 of the journal for 2020, Offers and What's Dyke by David Hill. And David Hill was one of the most enthusiastic and long-running researchers investigating Offers Dyke and What's Dyke, with Margaret Worthington, later Margaret Worthington Hill. And this is just an announcement that blog post has come out. As you can see there, I started doing blog posts about my reflections on the mortuary archaeology within Fear the Walking Dead, but we'll come back to that. And indeed, I did go straight into my reflections on TV series. Viking Season 6 Part 1 features multiple times this month, but also I looked at reflections on Season 2 of Fear the Walking Dead and how the dead are portrayed in that, mass burial and commemoration in Viking Season 1. And then I did a series of posts on the contemporary archaeology, in other words, present day or recent architectures, material cultures, landscapes of death. And I looked at crematoria. So I did one post about one crematorium, which I kept quiet. I didn't mention its name I don't think you can probably guess where it is, but it's not clear exactly where it is. And talking about how it's a space that's newly opened, so you can see how that space is in its very early stages of use. It doesn't look busy. It's very underpopulated. So I explored the landscapes of this relatively new, decade only old crematorium, including the sculptures for children, and with letters you can post to dead siblings. Not for everyone, but for some people. And there's the crematorium building, and then I just reviewed the memorial material cultures within that space. And I went on to do that with a series of other gardens of remembrance associated with crematoria. So here is Widnes, and then I also do one looking at Warrington, Walton Lee Crematorium, looking at the gardens of remembrance there, and from an archaeologist's perspective, reflecting on what this tells us, and what this tells us about contemporary attitudes and spaces of death and remembrance. Okay, so that takes you through like a sort of sketchy quick brief survey of the different memorial forms and the different spaces and material cultures one finds when visiting a crematorium. So I'm doing contemporary archaeology, and then soon after David Hill's paper, I had a brand new original piece of research published in the Offa's Dyke Journal by Dr. Ethan Doyle White, and he looks at the Faston Ditch in Kent, a linear earthwork that's undated but has attracted some modern interpretation in forms of sculpture And that's a really fascinating example of both the challenges of interpreting undated linear earthworks, but also how we present them to the public. And in his case, he was able to show there's some very, so should we say, outdated stories still persisting about those that monuments. So it's really worth looking at as a case study in how archaeologists struggle with linear monuments. They're so big sometimes, even the small ones are big, and yet they sort of escape being the same rigor of interpretation that we would demand of other investigations of other kinds of monument. I then looked at one museum display showing the early Anglo-Saxon, or 5th, 6th, early 7th century funerary remains. And this is an important one because this is Stoke, this is the Potteries Museum, and this display of 19th century discovered excavated skeletal remains and artifacts from Stapen Hill on the very edges of Staffordshire, but at the heartland of what was to become the Mercian kingdom, is juxtaposed next to the Staffordshire Hoard. And so I talked about this in terms of what we can learn about how we display the dead in museums and the choices we make about what to display, how to display, particularly old collections where the excavations weren't particularly good, but they still can perform a role of education and engagement within the museum space. But also, they provide a funerary aspect to tell us about mortality in the human past, as to be juxtaposed alongside the hoard evidence, which has dominated the museum. And there's digital displays as well as a mock-up grave and a display with a photograph of the excavations behind to give that sense of the material evidence. And while I had criticisms of it, I thought this is really good and really important. This was put on display. See my other videos for more on the ethics of and practices of displaying the dead. I then came back to horned helmets in Viking season 6 because, of course, horned helmets have been kept out of the TV show. The aesthetic, the demand to look authentic, even though they've got guy liner and tattoos and ridiculous leather and so much else that's not found in the archaeological record, they want to look authentic. So they've taken the horns off the horned helmets of the Vikings in seasons 1 to 5. But for season 6, for one bad guy, they put a kind of, I thought it was leather at first actually, but it's sort of leather covering metal and horn thing, and it's supposed to look intimidating. I think it looks blimmin' ridiculous, but anyway, I reflect on the benefits and the ridiculousness of that in the TV show. And also, more touchingly, I think, the show goes places. I mean, this is one of the most powerful things about historical dramas. You can diss what they do right and what they do wrong, but at the end of the day, they allow us to touch on human stories in the past and to capture our imagination and extend our archaeological and historical knowledge. And the burial of a small child, a newborn, in the TV show, takes us places that we can't often go in the archaeological record, or and perhaps don't get the attention. And I think that's a very important, significant aspect of these TV shows. It's not saying that this is the way it happened. It's about getting us into different places, making us think about things that we may not otherwise reflect on. I then come back and look at a common theme of my research, looking at churchyards and how they're being revitalized by the presence of cremation burial. But something I hadn't looked at before, namely how in some churchyards you have a bifurcation of two spaces where modern cremations are able to get back close to the church and have distinctive spaces in churchyard extensions. Well, sometimes you get one or the other, but this was an interesting case study in Cheshire where we have a churchyard. It's only a Victorian church, but the old part of the churchyard, long since disused, but it's been reoccupied, reused by the presence of the of cremation burials. Very different from the original tombs, and very low, almost flush with the grass, with only small little memorials, but bringing the dead back close to the church. And I think that's one of the key dimensions I've published on about cremation in contemporary deathscapes, is that they can populate spaces, path sides, little corners, niches by buildings that otherwise would have been just abandoned or full of older tombs. And so they bring a new vibrancy, memorial vibrancy, if that's a phrase, well, I've just made it up now, back to these older spaces. So I'm shifting my blogs from what we can say about contemporary deathscapes, the popular culture references to the past death, and actually ancient memorial evidence. Another post I look at Display of the Dead. I was visiting Bryggen, the Museum for Medieval Bergen in Western Norway. There's a death selfie for you. The ethics of that I talk about in other posts. But there you are. There's me with a skeleton on display. And this is actually a rare instance where a Christian period skeletal remains has been put on display in museums. And actually, there has been long argued by pagan communities and by others that there's a double standard in the way we treat, and that often transposes itself or manifests itself in terms of a racial or ethnic double standard in how we treat human remains. If they're Christian medieval, they may get a respectful reburial. If they're older or they're from other parts of the world, we stuff them in a case and gawp at them. And so I think it's really interesting as this is the second. I haven't travelled extensively in Sweden and Norway for a long time, but in my recent journeys, I've seen two displays of Christian period, in other words, what we would call late medieval Christian burial practices, and I think at least whatever you think of displaying the dead and whether we should do it entirely, at least they're doing it for historic Christian periods as well as earlier remains. So I found that very interesting. So I went to a couple of years ago, but I haven't done too many site visits of late because, of course, the COVID-19 lockdown has made it very difficult to visit sites. So my older blog posts have dealt with stuff like this, but this is very much a site visit. I went to Llandoneg on the west coast of North Wales, near Barmouth, St Tanag's Church, which is a Grade 2 listed building on National Trust managed, beautiful little church in the dunes by the sea. And that's the view of the church from the sea. And then I talk about the memorial evidence from it, because we have the only evidence that this was an early medieval church. In other words, perhaps there by the 6th, 7th century, really early, is the presence in the grounds within the church now, but where they originally were, we don't know. But they may have been brought to the site some later date, we don't know. But at least if this landscape has an early Christian association, because there's early Christian scribed stones. The ingenious stone, as it's called here, Llandanag 2, in other words, Latin inscriptions that take us back to the 5th, 6th centuries, the time immediately after the formal end of the Roman world, or the Roman province of Britannia, but where Latin-speaking, Latin culture is surviving with Christian communities and perhaps with secular elites in the British Western zone, and with Irish influence coming in across the Irish Sea, perhaps Irish settlement, Irish elites taking over some areas, we're seeing this continuation of Latin Christian culture to a degree. And so this is really exciting archaeological evidence. So I wanted to share that with you. I'm just trying to give you a quick summary, and I've got two more blog posts, both about the present, but again, one about modern memorialization and one about the TV show Vikings again. So, masks of memory. Now, I'm well aware of trees and roadsides and other kinds of landscape memorial ash scattering sites, and I've been aware of this tree on Hope Mountain as it's been used as a memorial with ties and ribbons and letters attracted to it. I even did I've embedded a TikTok in there where you can explore that. But I noticed on a recent visit that it had a mask added to it. So we actually have a memorial mask tied to the tree. Almost gives the tree the impression of being a face, but it actually has a memorial painted or marked on it to an individual. And so this is almost lockdown memorialization coming through here, which I thought was rather interesting. And most recently, I shall only just briefly mention it because I've done an earlier video about this, Lagertha's funeral in Viking season 6, which I think is the ultimate Viking funeral on TV. Not because it's accurate, not because it's inspired by any specific archaeological evidence, or there's bits of Ibn Fadlan and Osebeya and Gokstad that are the archaeological ship finds that are informing this, some of the Gausel ships and so on. This is very much for TV. It's made up, and it's fantastical and ludicrous and yet wonderful and memorable and emotional and theatrical all mixed into one. So I talk about that. So that's my just to give you an introduction to the range of things I've been doing on my blog in August 2020. Let's move on to my videos. Well, I've done 5 videos since my last monthly roundup. I did one debating displaying the dead in local museums, where I talk about a publication I did with my doctoral researcher Suzanne Evans, but this was before she was my doctoral researcher, looking at local museums and how they display the dead, perhaps without expert curatorial help or support, but they do make attempts to include memorials. If not dead bodies, they often contain memorial material culture, such as grave goods found in the 19th, 18th century, brought into the museum from Bronze Age burials, Iron Age burials. They may contain pots, they may contain bits of medieval gravestone, they may contain war memorials removed from local chapels and churches. So these museums sort of condense down a whole series of memorial dimensions. And I talk about Llangollen's volunteer run museum in that regard, and talk about how it operates. So I really use that as an example to sort of shout out and wave the flag, particularly in these COVID times, for local museums, and how while a lot of the debate about displaying and curating human remains is focused on national museums and regional museums, city museums, let's not forget the local museums, where for local school kids, for local people, and for tourists, the story of the ancient dead is part of the narrative of people's lives and localities. So that's what that blog video is about. Then I actually did, this is by commission, Kenny Brophy, Dr. Kenny Brophy at Glasgow University. So I did it the wrong way around, because you never know which. Different universities. University of Glasgow. He's an archaeologist, extremely exciting what he does. He works on the Neolithic and early Bronze Age, but he also does a lot on public archaeology, contemporary archaeology. He's got a wonderful blog of his own called The Urban Prehistorian. You should definitely check that out. But he commissioned me, which was a great honour, to contribute some tips for his students on archaeological blogging. So I actually did a video for him, because he asked me, said, "This is what I want. Could you do this?" And I went, "Yes," because you've actually asked kind of nicely, and you've actually asked with a specific brief, as rather than something vague. So I did a little video for him about what I've found blogging is good for and what it isn't so good for. What I don't do with it. So I think that's quite an interesting um, post, really. I then did one about death and material culture in Vikings, and that dovetails with the blogs I've been talking about. And I did one on the Ice Maiden's funeral, farewell to Lagatha. So that's what I was just talking about in my blog about Lagatha's funeral in Viking season 6, part 1. But I also did a video out and about at Watts Dyke at Old Oswestry Hillfort, because English Heritage curate and manage Old Oswestry Hillfort. Is a wonderful late Bronze Age, Iron Age hilltop fortification with multiple defences running around the hill. You can see the hill behind me, but not so many people know that the 8th, early 9th century linear earthwork called Watts Dyke runs in and out of it on the north and south. So in the Mercian frontier work incorporates the hill fort, which was already 15, 16, 1700 years old and out of use, into the defences. And that's wonderful, and it's really interesting. And is that symbolic? Is that practical? What was the rationale of that? Well, that's a whole other debate. But at least I wanted to show on video form, as I did with the Trevonen videos, I wanted to show what you get to see in the landscape. So there's a few cows get in the way, blimmin' cows. But you can watch that video and see how I combat the bovine beasts, but also show what you see in the landscape, so that maybe more people will go and visit not only the hill fort, but also Watts Dyke to its north, and a little bit of it to the south as well. So they're my videos this month. One a few other reflections on YouTube. As you can see from my views, I'm not getting a massive amount of views. And I'm not really worried about that. This YouTube channel isn't for mass consumption, and I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to create videos that I think have a integrity, have a utility, to speak to my students, speak to those with enthusiasm, and I hope over the years, as with my blog posts, it's not about mass immediate reception. It's about the trickle, that people will see these and people will use them over time, and that slowly but surely this will provide a valuable resource for people researching and interested in the archaeology of death and the archaeology of memory, and the heritage and public archaeology dimensions of those fields. So I'm not too worried that only 16 people have looked at my reflections. Perhaps I'm not being controversial enough, but that's not my aim here. But I'm going to keep plugging away at this, regardless, because I'm not here to do sort of buzzy entertainment things for the kids or just do popular aggrandizing stuff. I want to get into some sort of more specific issues. So anyway, that's just a point. I'm not too fussed about that, but if you do watch them and you enjoy them, fine. Tell your friends, subscribe, send me an email saying how much you found them useful. If you don't like them, then don't bother commenting, or do send me if you've got something constructive to say. And I do want to say, actually, if you have any ideas of things you want me to cover in mortuary archaeology, you think it'd be nice to do a video on, do drop me an email. Or I remember I'm on Twitter at HowardMRW, so do let me know, and I will try to honour that request. In that regard, I did promise on a poll to do a video about Vikings, but I also promised to do one about drunken Archaeodeath, and I didn't specify what on earth that was going to be about. Was it going to be about me getting hammered while I did a video, or is it about actually archaeology and funerary remains and alcohol consumption? Well, I think I was going to do the latter, but I still promise that one, so I haven't forgot it. It's on my list of vlogs to do and blogs to do, really. Right, in this third part of the monthly roundup, I just want to point out some things that interested me or irked me during the month to do with online stuff. So I use my Twitter feed, for example. Nice to see that Mercy and Migrant has been exploring Offers Dyke, partly inspired at least by my various tweets and posts and activities about that. So yay to that. That's point one I wanted to bring up. Here's another one. Martin Brown, a very experienced archaeologist and pal, passed this one on. This is the Salton Hall COVID emergency theatre that's being created outside the new barrow that they've got there for interring modern cremation burials. So this is how the prehistoric past is inspiring present day death rituals and funerary architectures. So that's a fantastic aspect of what's going on behind the scenes. I've blogged about that a bit, or not about that site, but other sites. I still haven't had a chance to visit Salton Hall. I go down there and see the barrow in Shropshire, but it's really fascinating how they're adapting it with an open air amphitheatre to facilitate social distancing memorial services during the pandemic and the continuing need to respect that space. On the other side of things, the concern for actual real ancient monuments, of course, there's ongoing disputes between archaeologists over their different stances on the Stonehenge tunnel plans. And of course, the point is, regardless of what we think about Stonehenge, the broader British landscape is up for grabs now, with the Tories' plans to ease and adapt planning regulations, and the fear is that archaeology will be removed from planning considerations, which will mean that many sites that could tell us such important information about our shared heritage and might just go under the bulldozer as with the pressure on just building new crap homes. So this is an area of ongoing dispute and discussion, and I just wanted to flag up that I've occasionally waded in on this, although I'm not one of the big players on either side of the debate. I do respect and appreciate Stonehenge's landscape, but I don't think the new tunnel is going to destroy that landscape in the way that some of the campaigners are purporting it will. Oh yes, and I talked about this last month, but here's the link to the Paul Belford article about removing archaeology and heritage protection from the planning system, which I would recommend you go and read. Down at the Offers Dyke Centre, King Offa himself is wearing a mask, so that's a warning or an encouragement for us all. You can still look cool in a king and slightly despairing of life, wearing a mask. Suffolk pubs, genius. So many opportunities to deploy this little paperclip. I haven't done it yet because I haven't had the nerve, but so many options on social media. Katharina Rebase Salisbury wins with the best photograph. This is Archduke Franz Ferdinand dressed as a mummy around 1894. I just made the point, I wish he'd worn that in 1914. It would have saved a world war. Maybe if it was bulletproof at least. There's Rory Dale with his Norwegian roundabouts. Can't beat those Norwegians. I just have to leave this here for a minute as perhaps one of the most nerdy, just brilliant. If you know about Tom Bombadil and the ongoing jokes about him. Marcel says it. This is the content I'm here for. And here's the results proving that as well as Die Like Vikings, which I have done a blog about, not with that title, I also promised to do Drunken Archaeodeath. And there's so many other things I could talk about, but I'll leave my brilliant humour here. Early Anglo-Saxon pots were stamped to convey messages, which is actually an argument put forward by Julian D. Richards in his 1987 publication. In contrast, Merovingian vessels were franked. Get it? I literally amaze myself with my own humour and nobody else, clearly. Now, the really big news of this month has been that I've just participated over this last week in the 26th European Association of Archaeology's annual meeting, and the first one that's been done digitally, virtually, therefore, it's a virtual meeting. It was going to be in Budapest, but it was actually on here. Now, I've listened to lots of sessions. I've enjoyed myself. I listened to 2 of the keynotes. I really had a good time in some regards, sitting in my garage listening to a lot of things. Is this the new normal, or are we going to go back to real world conferences next year? Well, I would say that I've enjoyed it. I think well done to the EAA for putting it on, for not cancelling. Fits in with the spirit of what I did back in April when I decided not to cancel my day conference I was holding in Shropshire, but this was on a much bigger scale, Europe wide. They hosted it digitally. Did it work? Was it a success? Well, a lot of people are online saying it is. I say it's not really a success. There was a lot of technical problems. It was very frustrating. It was very isolating. But I did get to hear a lot of good stuff. I have broader critical points that I think the problem with online stuff is it brings to the fore just how crap some conference papers are and how they're really not up to speed and up to standard, and they really should have thought about what they were trying to argue and what they were trying to convey before they actually started speaking. But people might say that about my presentation too. So but I think at one level it was good. They did it, and I learned a lot, and I connected, and it was good to be part of that network. But one of the keynotes, a former colleague of mine, Carl Knappett, tried to claim that this shows that we are ready, our technology was ready for this virtual networking. Sorry, mate, you couldn't have been listening to the the sessions. There was some that worked very well, but every session had someone who couldn't get their PowerPoint to work. Every session had someone there was huge delays. So it's not the EAA's fault, but we're really collectively not there yet in terms of the technology or our ability to prepare and present. And a lot of people are going to disagree with that opinion. I might come back and address that in a separate video, actually. But I did co-organise a session with Liam Delaney on establishing boundaries, which I think was very successful. We had some good papers, but it was impaired by pullouts, people who didn't want to present digitally, which I don't know why they didn't want to do that, because we lost some really good, promising papers, and it was impaired by some people not being able to get the tech up and running, and we had to swap and adapt at the last minute. So it wasn't ideal by any means. So I'm glad I was able to virtually connect, and I learned about, I was in sessions about gender in the funerary archaeology, medieval objects, establishing boundaries, my own. I then skipped out for most of Thursday, but I was back for looking at coping with the dead, a session on coping with the dead, a session on pre-Christian rituals and religion, signaling intent, looking at beacon systems and communication systems in early medieval, prehistoric, early medieval, and then modern contexts, medieval and modern contexts, and finally a session on medieval stone monuments. So what I am actually saying, it was a success, aren't I? I'm saying it was a success, but it was not. I don't believe people who say it was an unmitigated success. There were some real technicalities, both technical and in terms of it brought to the fore some of the challenges with the technology we're deploying. And to be honest, some of the PowerPoint slides I could hardly see, even on a big screen. You just couldn't see the detail. So it was about screen resolution, getting the PowerPoints to work. The way people were speaking there, the sound audio connection, was some people just didn't have the right audio connection. So there were lots of technical difficulties, but there was some great content. So I'm just glad they didn't cancel. They kept on going, and I think there should be a digital element in future meetings. I don't think we're going to go back to an analog only, a real world only. I think there's going to be that aspect in future meetings too. Hey, and you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to promote my TikTok channel because I'm going strong with at least one TikTok a day. And do check out my TikTok where there's some serious content. I do my and some less so. I think there's some good funerary stuff. I have been steering away from cemeteries and graveyards. I don't think it's really appropriate for this format to be trudging around cemeteries and graveyards showing funerary monuments. I think no, but I am talking about funerary archaeology in different ways, landscapes, places I've visited, and so do check that out. And my various videos, bits of cows make their appearance, Offa's Dyke, and so on. Right, I'm going to wrap this up now. As I said, please subscribe to this channel if you haven't. Do look at the blog, do look at the TikTok, and follow me on Twitter at HowardMRW. And I'll see you next month for more Archaeodeath updates.
For relaxing times, make it Archaeodeath time.